Hello, Evelyn.
Hello.
Gotta recrop my stuff here real quick. And we can do a little pre-show chat here. They can hear us.
Okay.
It's okay. We're
right.
going to leave the starting screen up, but we're just kind of getting prepped here. I'm going to do a little quick recrop of our video stuff. I think it's going to be a fun time tonight. Your video just a little bit bigger. That last song, the one before that, that's one of my favorite songs on this particular playlist.
I like it.
Yeah, it's very upbeat. I saw you kind of bouncing around to it. Yeah, so it should be good tonight. We're going to be talking all kinds of fun stuff around Cavaliers, relation to paladins, codes of chivalry. I think it's going to be a fun conversation, and we'll talk a little bit about ability scores and then whatever else the audience kind of throws at us. They normally got some good ideas on things we can talk about.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
Thank you for, I think we made some good progress today on the stream, sort of list of our show times. That was great. So we'll get that up on the Twitch page. I'm going to make that our default background, so that'll be good.
Okay. Great, and I'll get that attached to various social things. And then I updated all the commands in the box in our panels underneath the video there, so people can see those.
Excellent.
And currently, DCG, his Etsy store is down for, he's working on some stuff. So I put his Instagram up so that people can find him still.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, very good.
Yep.
All right. And we're going to start here about a minute early, try to get a jump on it.
Sounds good. It's bigger.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and switch it over here. All right. We are live, and audio sound okay to you, Evelyn?
Yeah, sounds great.
All right, very good. Well, I'm excited about tonight. I've spent a little bit of time this afternoon getting prepped for it. You know, part of this effort that I've had in preparation has included this inventory I did of my existing hard copy Dragon magazines, and I really I know there's other archives out there not archives rather, but there's indexes of them that are available, but I wanted to do my own just to identify those things which were of interest to me. You know, I don't need an index of everything, and so I went through them just finding things that really kind of stuck out to me, and so that kind of is driving some of the conversations we're having on Loremaster's Arcanum for a while here.
Fair.
Yeah, it should be fun. So how has your week been?
It's been good.
Yeah?
Getting excited for Saturday.
Yeah, it's going to be a blast.
Yeah.
The group was a little bit unruly last night. That was kind of funny. So for our viewers, we had pre-campaign call. We're kicking off, and that's a big topic, of course. You see in the upper right-hand corner of your screen the logo for Greyhawk Awakening, and that is our big campaign that's kicking off this week. Hey, Lurkenstein, good to see you, Brian. And so Greyhawk Awakening is going to be the third campaign that is streamed on Blue Box. I actually have another campaign that I run just with my family, which is not really streamed. I think I've done it once. But this is going to be the big one launching. So we're doing the pre-launch on Saturday with Jay, or Lord Gasumba, who is really helping us in innumerable ways, and a great friend of the show, and somebody that's kind of helped us get our Greyhawk stuff going. And so that's really, really been a fun thing. And then additionally, we're going to be launching our, hey Jay, how's it going? We're going to be launching our full weekly stream on Tuesday. So the 2 times to remember, and I'll pop them up on the screen later in the show, but the 2 times to remember are: 1, our 6 o'clock Central, 7 Eastern stream on Saturday. And that's on all of our socials. We'll post it again this week on Instagram. I took the day off yesterday for Blackout Tuesday because we felt like, we probably should just, honor that with what's going on. But we're getting right back after the promotional stuff today. I'll be putting out something later tonight. But 6 o'clock Central, 7 Eastern, that would be midnight GMT time for our UK viewers on Saturday. Then our regular weekly stream will start on Tuesday, the very next Tuesday, that's the 9th. And that one will start at 5 p.m. Central, 6 Eastern, or 11 p.m. if you're GMT, some of our UK viewers. And on that particular night, as we kick off the full campaign, we'll be giving away this guy right here, this World of Greyhawk 1983 Classic box set. And it's going to be a lot of fun, and some lucky winner is going to get a beautiful copy of the 83 box set, which, those things are pretty rare to come by. So it should be fun, huh, Evelyn?
Yep, I'm excited.
As you've prepared for your character, and I don't want you to go too much into it, but before we get into our first topic today, which is going to be from Dragon Magazine 72, was actually Gary Gygax's code for the Cavalier. It was the first Cavalier character class, which was launched in that particular episode. Let me turn this down just a bit. And I think that's going to be a lot of fun to go over. And then we're going to go into some of the specific codes. There's some great stuff in 127 we're going to talk about tonight. So it should be a lot of fun. It is going to be cool. Thanks. Yeah, so Greyhawk is fun, Lurkenstein. And I know you've played some of that old school stuff. It's been amazing to me. Hey, Jay, if you're still listening, last night while we were doing our launch call and we were doing all the audio video testing, and yeah, no, I'm not going to refer to the chicanery that was going on with my players, Evelyn, but rather that Josh, who is, complete Gen Z, he's Josh of NPC Voices. He's super talented. He's never played anything but 5e. And hey, Ali B, and he's already gone out and he was showing us, he's got the original 83 box set, he's got all kinds of Greyhawk supplements, he's gone out there, he's buying all this stuff just to immerse himself in the lore. Yep. And this guy had never even heard of Greyhawk until a month ago when I reached out to him. So it's fantastic to see this new generation of players that is embracing the fantastic lore and all the content that really started Dungeons and Dragons. And I think it's going to be a blast. So, all right. Well, let's get started with our first conversation. Well, I should mention also, again, we have a new sponsor. We're very excited. This is somebody that I've been working with for a while already. Her name is Frederica Draws. And Frederica Draws, you can find her, all one word, Frederica Draws on Instagram.
Actually.
And yeah, you can.
One of our new commands that we
shout
have
her
now.
out. Thank you. Combination co-host and mod, Evelyn. And so she actually has done some of the artwork for us previously. She did all the characters in my Rune Lords campaign, and she actually has done now the first character in our Greyhawk campaign, and I'm going to pull him up here in a second. And she is now working on the second character, and I think I might have overcropped my monitor for the dragon pages, so we'll see if this actually comes up correctly. But here we go. This is Brim. Brim is our half ogre fighter. I've never run a half ogre in any of my campaigns. I really didn't like those sort of exotic races. That's about as exotic as you're going to see in any of my campaigns. But it was sort of canonized in 1E, 2E. And I think it would kind of match up to what you see in 5E now with the Goliath races. And sometimes players like that idea. So this is really slick artwork. I'm cutting off the top of his head, but he's got the snarl, he's got the fangs. He is a massive 7.5 feet tall, 400 pounds I think or so. Just a monster of a character, but he has all the attendant deficits as well. So there's. I'm not super big on hyper balancing, and we're going to talk about that with the Cavalier class tonight, Evelyn, because there's some stuff you've not seen with the original 1E Cavalier. If it's played right, they can be pretty meta. I mean, they're uber characters, but they have deficits. Yeah, Big Boy got abs. He does. So Josh is really, really excited to play that player. And he has a fantastic backstory for that player as well. So it's a very, it's a character I think that people will be able to identify with and empathize with, and it's going to be a lot of fun. All right, let's talk topic 1, Cavaliers. And this is actually the second article I want to go to. So let me kill the full screen here. They go Control L on that real quick and go back to the article I want, which is Gary's original article. And so we're looking now at the Chivalrous Cavalier by Gary Gygax. This is from Dragon Magazine 72. So I think the first thing that's worth mentioning is that Cavaliers in general are oftentimes by the uninitiated or unfamiliar confused with, pardon me for pulling both those things around, confused with paladins. And there are some very distinct differences. So Evelyn, why don't you talk a little bit about this, because I know you've got some familiarity. How do you see the difference between a paladin and a cavalier?
Well, there are certain orders of Cavalier that are very similar to paladins, at least in 3.5. But paladins are always, as they should be, always lawful good, or lawful evil if they're the anti-paladin. But when you're talking about your good paladin, they are always lawful good. Cavaliers have more opportunity to be kind of across the spectrum as far as their alignment goes. And rather than necessarily being allied to a particular deity, they are allied to a specific order. So they, have each type of Cavalier kind of has a different thing that they might pick up as the order that they're tied to. So
that's exactly right.
Not necessarily religion-based, though there is an order that is.
yeah, exactly, correct. And Brian said it as well. It's similar, but there's no divine element to it. So they're not affiliated directly with a god, but they have a code. And that code, when properly played, hello, how are you, Esther?
Can you say hi?
Hi. So that Cavalier has a code, which in many ways can be every bit as restrictive as a paladin's code, but they don't have the divine spell casting ability, and they don't have the direct tie to a deity. Now, it's interesting, as we go to the second article I'm going to show you in a second, we're going to talk about orders and orders of Cavalier as they were described, and some really cool ideas around honor systems and things that I will actually be employing for our paladin in our Greyhawk campaign. Hey, Redbeard, good to see you, sir. Welcome. We're just having a little fireside chat here about old school D&D, and we're talking about Cavaliers right now. So, the knight is a type of the Western samurai. Yes, it's a very good way to think of it. So you have this code of honor, very much an honor-based system similar to what you would see in the samurai, the Japanese samurai culture, and that is core to their pathos and their ideology, and that makes for fantastic role play. So let's start with this first piece, which is how Gary originally described the Cavalier class. And some of the mechanics of it, and then we're going to jump to the fun stuff on the philosophy, the role play. There's some fantastic things. Hey, Bloodwild, good to see you, sir. Always fun. All right, so As you see here, I've got highlighted the Code of Chivalry. I don't know if you can read that at home, but I'll read some relevant points. I won't read everything, of course. It's a general Code of Chivalry. They are subject to it, and they have to apprehend it. They have to follow it. You see here, the profession demands constant training and practice in arms and warfare. A portion of each day that's spent adventuring must also be spent in mounted drill and combat afoot. So in Gary's mind, the Cavalier was very much tied to this idea of mounted combat, the lance, the war horse, and it was a heavy part of being a Cavalier, even more so than you would see with a typical paladin. And then there are benefits to this. So one example here is that if a Cavalier examines a mount, they had that sort of old, Western style ability in the old West. They could, look at the horse's teeth and they could tell you exactly, what you needed to know about it. They just have an intuitiveness and a knowledge of their mount. So they get benefits. Their mounts, they actually get a better sort of hit die on the mount, and they have any steed they select by a Cavalier will have +2 hit points per hit die, and so they'll always have the ability to lend up. I think they should call it. Well, so the calling of a mount is. The calling of a mount really is more like the paladin skill. A paladin will be able to call his mount. I believe in 3.5 that's done at 5th level. Whereas the Cavalier would select his mount, or he might inherit it. There is a lot in the Cavalier which is tied to genealogy. Oftentimes they would have come from families of fairly noble birth. It's not necessary, but it's a common trope because it's based a lot, of course, on medieval Europe, and that's normally. You had to have money for a war horse. You had to have money for plate armor. You had to have money to get into the tourney. So it was not normally something that would come from the poorer classes. Now I think with D&D...
Well, and you had to be titled to even become a knight to begin with, so...
That's right, exactly. Now, so with D&D, we can relax some of that a little bit, but it's a nice thing to sort of keep in mind, and it's so rich with character development opportunities. One of the abilities that Gary gives the Cavalier in this class is if they choose to parry rather than attack, they get their full attack bonus detracted from the attacker's to hit roll. So if you're a Cavalier and your total is +8 to hit, and that includes strength, specialization, even weapon, if you got a masterwork weapon or a magic weapon, all of it. So your total to hit bonus when parrying could be used to subtract against the attacker. And this was the idea that the Cavalier could often be much like the guys with swords, armor, horses had the money. That's exactly right. And so the Cavalier, he might be the guy that would be in the front of the party, taking the slings and the arrows and defending. And in order to provide that defense, he might have to parry against a really difficult foe for a period of time to give his party a chance to do what they're going to do. So it's a nice ability of the Cavalier.
Right.
And anytime I pause, Evelyn, you feel free to jump in.
Yeah.
Something else is, armor. We talked about this. The Cavalier, Gygax said, looks at his armor as a badge of station more than even just protection. So he would always look his best. His armor would be well kept. He would seek to acquire the most, valuable, finest armor that he could within his means.
He's the shiniest one.
Exactly. Because it was as much about this honor and this image. The image is a big part of the Cavalier's, pathology, and then so they get benefits from having this. So, as you'll see a little bit later, as they level up, they can do things like leap on a horse. Fully armored and encumbered, because it's just a class ability that they have, both being proficient with armor and with mounts.
Right.
Then here, this was an interesting one. The Cavaliers, when they record strength, dexterity, and constitution, they had, and I didn't even realize this till I read this article. It was very unique. So in 1E, Evelyn. What was the only stat that would have a percentile die attached to it if you rolled an 18? Strength. Mm-hmm. So what Gygax's idea was for the Cavalier was that all of these things, because they're constantly in training, that's right, Brian, because they're constantly in training, because their martial ability is under constant testing, physical rigor. That one of the unique class features of the Cavalier is that they would roll percentile dice for strength, dex, and con, all the sort of critical combat things.
Yeah.
And then as they leveled up, they would have the ability to roll. So as the Cavalier levels up in experience, each level, including up to 10, which by the way, we talked about this last week, 10 is where all the level caps are. You know, he couldn't imagine why a player would want to play past level 10.
Everyone's retired now.
Yeah, kill him, retire him. Yeah, exactly. So what would happen is, let's say I had a 15 strength, or dex. Let's say I had a 15 dex. So then I'd roll percentile dice, and okay, I've got all right, great, I got an 89. That's a good roll. So then, when I level up to level 2, I'm going to roll a d10. And I rolled an 8. I just became an 1897, or pardon me, 1597 on my dex. Now when I level up to level 3, I roll again, and I would do this for each of the stats. So I roll a d10 for strength, dex, and con. I rolled a 3, so I hit the number on the head. So once I go over double 0, now my strength goes to a 16, and I can start the process up again. So you can actually raise your base stats as a Cavalier. Now, of course, if you're playing Pathfinder, 3.5, I think 5e, they do it as well.
Right.
You have stat bonuses, automatic stat up bonuses at level 4, 8, 12. I don't play that way. So if you think of how concrete a PC's statistics were, you could change your armor class, your hit points got better all the time, but your abilities, those were inviolable. They stay unless you found a Tome of Might or something else that would a permanent ability score. You could have a belt of Frost Giant Strength or something else that was a modifier based on an item, but a permanent change to your ability stats was really rare in 1E, 2E. So this was a very cool feature of the Cavalier. Additionally, they're immune to fear. Fear of any sort, magical or otherwise, will never affect a Cavalier. And similar to a Paladin in this respect, if you're of good alignment, because Cavaliers could be neutral or evil. Cavaliers were not tied, so you could be, for example, a lawful neutral Cavalier. Perhaps you are highly rigid and you follow the social structures and the laws, but you think nothing of these distinctions of good and evil, that it's about law and order and process and rank and privilege. So you could play that kind of a Cavalier, but if you were good Cavalier, then you would emit a +1 or a protection from fear, rather, for me in a 1 foot radius.
Right.
So really, really cool stuff. Or probably that's a 1 inch, which I think was a 12th in 1E. So it's like a small radius around you that you would emit this protection from evil. And then the big one, yeah, it is. It's been a refresher for me too, Brian. The big one is that Cavaliers could survive past 0 hit points. And as we get into the lore of this in a second, you're going to see some of the ideology behind it. It's really fun. But a Cavalier here you see highlighted, they were able to survive in Gary Gygax's structure below 0. And so they could go down to a maximum number of hit points equal to their first level hit points. So if they had, they could have up to 13 hit points at first level. Yeah, I think that makes sense. That's what I was thinking. So that 1 inch square would be the 10 foot radius for the protection from evil. So then the ability to go below 0, then if you had 12 hit points, let's say at first level, then forevermore, when you go to 0, you don't drop.
Right.
You stay up, and you don't drop till you're at the actual number. So it says there, note, when the negative number of hit points is reached, the Cavalier can no longer attack, but must immediately rest, bind wounds, and seek healing. So it's a really powerful addition to the Cavalier. And I could think of some easy play options for that, but one thing I don't know, and if we have any old school, and I'm sure we probably do, 1E, 2E players or DMs on here, is that really? Because I remember playing that, I thought, before this dragon came out, but then again, I'm 49 and it's all blurring. So it might have been where I got it too. But this is different, because they're saying They don't even say when he reaches. So, for example, there's an ogre ability. Yeah, that's what I thought. So there's an ogre ability called Blood Rage in the 1E2E system. If you're a half ogre, you could have that Blood Rage. And the way I would play that if a character had it, yeah, so -10 was final death. I have a modified house rule, which is I add whatever your con bonus is to that. So if you got a 15 con or 14 con with a +2, 14 with a +2, then you could go to -12 before death. What I don't know, and if any of the old school folks here can help me remember how this would be handled with a Cavalier, if that Cavalier had 12 hit points at first level, when he hits -12, okay, he can no longer attack, but when does he die? Does he die at 1 hit point past that 12? Does he have -10 beyond that -12? Where does the Cavalier die? So he's dead. So that's interesting, Jay, because if you read what Gary said here, it said the maximum number of negative hit points allowable is equal to the number of hit points the Cavalier had at first level. Note, when a negative number of hit points is reached, oh, not when that negative number, okay, I misread that. Okay, so when a negative number is reached, he is not unconscious, but he can rest, he can do other things, he cannot continue to attack. Gotcha. That's what it is. That makes sense.
Gotcha.
Yeah, thank you for that. That helps. Now, skipping on to horsemanship. Very cool things. I already mentioned at 3rd level, he can vault into his mount with bulky armor on and with the steed underway. So some very cool, sliding up in full plate mail on your horse as it's charging. Those would be some fun roleplay moments. They can get their mounts to greater speed at 5th level. And then you have a sequence of more exotic mounts that they can get, from Pegasus to a hippogriff to a griffin. Now they don't get these mounts, right? These are not like the paladin calling his holy mount. But if they somehow find, buy, train, chain one, then they have the ability to ride them, which is a cool feat.
Right.
What do you think, Esther?
She thinks she's being entertaining.
She is. A Cavalier is entitled to full hospitality from another Cavalier. Let's just jump through the rest of these. Then he's got exemplar, so you've got your levels here, the level titles. In this case, he does have it going up to 12th level. Weapon proficiencies, they were proficient with virtually any weapon. Now, lance was something they sort of had to take, again, with the idea of mounted combat. Exactly. Wait until they have a lance with griffin attacks. That becomes a pretty incredible character. And then what I really like here are these codes of chivalry. And there's a lot of books on this. I've got a couple other 1E2E. I've got some, let me shrink this a little bit so you can see.
Yeah.
A couple 1E2E and 3.5 things on codes of chivalry, paladins codes. But here's what Gary had in his initial Cavalier. You've got the 11 sort of core virtues there: liberality, unselfishness, pride, etc. And then you've got the code of chivalry: noble service willingly rendered, defense of any charge unto death, courage and enterprise and obedience to rule, respect for all peers, honor to all above your station. That's going to be a fun one in a second when we look at it. Military prowess exercised in service for your lord. That goes kind of with the one above. Courtesy to all ladies. War is the flower of chivalry. Battle is the test of manhood. Combat is glory. I'm getting hyped up. I'm ready to go. Let's go. Personal glory above all in battle. Obedience and respect from all beneath your station. Scorn for those who are lowly and ignoble. Death to all who oppose the cause, and death before dishonor. So it was the idea that this character, had many similar restrictions to what a paladin had in terms of how they had to act. Last couple things on this, some notes from the Dungeon Master. They had that immunity to mind-affecting spells, in addition to fear, and +2 versus illusion. So they weren't immune, they didn't have that spell immunity to illusion, but they had a +2 against illusion. And of course, I already mentioned immune to all fear. And then they have retainers, and they could get retainers. So just a really, really cool class. So before I move on to the next article on this, any questions or comments on that, Evelyn, or any others from the chat? Questions or comments?
I think it's really cool how closely the actual code of chivalry follows the medieval codes of chivalry, like the rules and things that are actually historically accurate. I think that's really neat that they pulled so much from that.
Yeah, it's. I mean, that's what they were all about. You go back to what we talked about a week or two ago, sort of the origins of chainmail. Yeah, no, you're right, Pat. There is, and I've told this woeful story once before. I had the original deities and demigods when I was a teenager that had the misprint in it and had the sort of copyright stuff in it, and I don't have that anymore. So I'm kind of sad about that. But yeah, it is a great class, Jay, and I think it's something that. It really lost a lot through 3.5 and on. And so this is a perfect example where I say I'm running a core 3.5 campaign, but I'm pulling in all of these elements. And these are very simple modifications to make for statistics. But if you come back to this idea of balance, you think about a character that has the ability to improve their statistics, that has immunity to mind-affecting spells at a 90% rate, that can drop below 0 and not fall unconscious. They can still heal. They can still do other things where anybody else in the party is unconscious. Those are pretty unbalancing abilities. But there's also an attendant restriction on them and how they act. And so to maintain, which is very much the idea of a paladin, I have no problem with a paladin who's a well-played paladin being among the most powerful or perhaps the most powerful in the party, because he will also be the most restricted. And he will have to hold to those covenants. So that is the balance in and of itself. And I don't think, we need to overrule lawyer or overwork these types of classes to ensure there's perfect parity and balance in them. It's role play, and each class has its own unique assets. And sometimes a PC doesn't care. A player doesn't care if their PC is not going to win in one-on-one combat or isn't the most powerful. That's not what role play is always about.
Right.
All right, so let's switch to Article 2, and this is the one I am most excited about. This one and the one before it. So let's go Control L here, and let me scroll up. So not the Robotech. It's cool seeing these old Robotech articles, though. Man, I love these when I was a kid. Or articles, ads. Okay. So they have, in this is number 127, and 127 has a ton of stuff on knights and chivalry. So it has examples of knights. Let me scroll through here. And then it has a basic code of chivalry. And then lastly, and we're going to skip this one, I'm going to go to that one last. What I want to come to next is this guy right here, glory, danger, and wounds. So, well, he is a Cavalier, but he's a 3.5 Cavalier, which is a very different beast.
Yeah, he is a Cavalier.
Yeah, he is a Cavalier.
He's shiny, and he does have an order that he's part of.
He does. But I didn't pull in these sort of nuanced elements of 1E, 2E in the way that I would sort of today.
Right.
All right, so this is an article by Gary Hamlin, and it's on Cavaliers and their pursuit of honor, from Dragon Magazine 127. And this one has some really cool stuff. So both knights were standing in the water up to their chests, while arrows, lances, and stones rained down all around them. Before them, the enemy army marched in a show of enormous numbers. Behind them, their exasperated friends called from retreating ships, urging them to hurry, come aboard so the ships could be off. But the two knights had a problem. Each had sworn before the battle to be the last man to retreat, and each had refused to let the other have all the glory, since neither was willing to yield his point of honor, and they were unable to find a solution to the predicament. Instead of retreating, they shrugged and began wading back toward the shore where the enemy army was awaiting in an anxious bewilderment. Escape had been all but a few feet away, but rather than risk at least even the suggestion of dishonor, these two knights had quietly chosen that they would fight the opposing army together and fight to the death rather than be dishonored. And so that's kind of the opening to this article. And I'm not going to read all of this. It's a pretty lengthy article. I'm going to pull a few highlights. But man, if you are all interested in this class, go to the Dragon Magazine archives. If you don't have the hard copy, pull down 127. This article has cool historical references. It's got all kinds of different exemplar stories. It's one of the most fun things I've read in Dragon. So he talks a lot about this character, Tyrant the White. It was from a 15th century manuscript, and it was meant to portray the epitome of chivalry. And there's a lot of, doubt or debate as to whether or not these stories were true or literal. But it's still a lot of fun to read through, and it kind of shows you what the ideology was about. So the first thing, they said characters with extreme views and personalities represent a goldmine of roleplay. And I think that's so true. You can take the example of really extreme characters. If you look at our Rune Lords campaign, Evelyn, this weekend, our best roleplay moment was between you and Ixen. And a lot of that was was sort of part of the extremity, or the extremeness, if you will, of the characters.
Right.
Talk a little bit about what that was on Sunday and what drove that for you.
As far as like,
Don't make me play the video.
Irda has a very, very strong sense of good, how she defines it, of course. She is a chaotic good character. So she has what she believes is good, and she will follow that to the T, and part of that is being very loyal and taking care of the people that she cares the most about. And that's why she spent the majority of her life looking for the missing members of her family, and now she's grown very fond of the people that she's been traveling with now for basically a little over a month. But they've been through a lot together, and over again, Ixen has been doing things that's been risking the lives of not only the members of the party, but anything that is going to hurt them in the long term. And so she is. It comes from a couple of places. She has a very strong idea of what she believes is right and wrong, and he does not have that quite as
that's safe to say.
In his mind, what is right and wrong, and I think she tends to hold, she hopes to hold other people to that same value, but her anger comes from him, doing something that she feels was a very, very evil act, especially in this moment. But the general recklessness that he's shown amongst the party, especially with I think the first tipping point was the mask and turning Solomon to stone. It was here, and then he threw the flask in the tavern, and it just pushed her to past that point of, you have to either shape up or you're gonna not be alive much longer.
No,
that's how she.
Yeah, and I think you got that message across loud and clear. And yeah, Pat, you mentioned that on Sunday, and I agree. He does seem to be headed toward the BBEG role, like having a code of honor-driven Cavalier that some parties could consider reckless. Yeah, I think, and that's actually you're presaging what I'm about to talk about, Brian, because that is actually one of the downsides of this sort of ideology, and it can be a lot of fun. But if you come back to Ixen, and let's talk about Solomon in that campaign. If Solomon is played as this kind of Cavalier, then he probably is already challenged Ixen to a duel to the death. Because Ixen has, on at least 3 occasions, mortally endangered the party, not in the cause of right or good, but in selfish cause, not in the cause of honor or glory, but in selfish cause. And proper role play of a Cavalier and a Paladin would make it requisite that be dealt with and challenged. So it can create a very interesting dynamic in a party.
Well, and with Solomon, the particular order that he's part of, because he's mentioned it before, I feel like, Seraphim is doing a good job of reflecting that particular order that he's part of. It's all about, it's not as much to the codes of chivalry like 1E was, whereas he, his code is to follow, protect his friends and allies. Like, that is his job, and I think he does a good job of reflecting that. He has called Ixen out for endangering his friends and allies, and made it clear that even though he is and has been an ally, he is not afraid to do what is necessary to protect his other friends and allies.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. So coming back, then you see at the bottom there, and this is, I think, the key point of this article that we're gonna, kind of cover here in just about 5 minutes, 7 minutes or so we'll take to go through this. That last highlighted section there says our society's way of thinking is very different from theirs, and I think that's as we read through it, it's really hard for us to wrap our heads around the way this sort of code of chivalry actually worked, and it sounds so foreign to how we operate today in many ways, but it made them, what they were, logical or not. It is what they were, and it is a fantastic opportunity for role play. So, some of the stories here. So you have, consider, for example, the first thing is, a Cavalier will seek honor in battle.
Right.
They find honor in battle, and he cites the Song of Roland. And this was all about a battle with Charlemagne. And in this particular Song of Roland, the knight, Count Roland, he was massively overwhelmed. He was in a vanguard element of the army. And the rest of the army he was the rear guard for Charlemagne's forces. They came up against the Saracens, and the Saracens had their full army, and they were just this separate piece of the army. And so he had a horn that he could blow to call the remainder of the army to their aid. But in pride, the story goes, it would have been dishonorable for him to do that. He felt like they should be able to take on this larger army. So he charged headlong into battle. His forces are decimated. And then he finally blows, in this highlighted section here, it says, when he finally blows the horn, he sounded the horn not that he might be rescued, because it was too late for the rest of the army to get there, but in hope that the returning troops would avenge their deaths. So it's very antithetical. He makes the point later in the article that if somebody in today's military failed to sound an alarm that they should sound in order to gain if they did survive, they'd be court-martialed. They would be excoriated. It is requisite, but there were people in this time that viewed it this way, and this is kind of the idea behind, or the ideology behind, the honor of a Cavalier. Right. And then he's got another story here where he talks about these sort of epic battles, modern day. He says they're normally parodied by like Monty Python, right? The Knights of Ni. It's just a flesh wound. How about you? And so, we kind of parody that, but that's really how they were. And so there's a story here as, Roland fought and died. He arose from the battlefield, drew his sword, downed 400 of the enemy before his heart stopped beating from exhaustion. When his body was found, his brain and bowels were clearly exposed to view. Now, remember what we talked about with the Cavaliers' ability to remain conscious below zero?
Right.
So the quote here is, consider the kind of damage these legendary figures absorb while still managing to continue in the fray. It's no wonder that members of the Cavalier class are allowed to operate in the negative hit point range. So he is citing these historic examples, Black Knight, Knights of the shrubbery. That's right, you're right. And so it's a real explanation for why Gygax put that in. And he was a historian. He was, I mentioned last week that I read Saga of the Old City, the book 1 of the Gord series. And Gygax's knowledge of weaponry and armor and some of these, I'm fairly good with this stuff, and he's got some things that I had to look up. He's very, very deep into it. Yeah. Then he talks about French tactics at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. Idea here, they had this incredible armor. It was the first real deployment of heavy plate. Yeah, so I fought in your general direction. But they had these massive armored knights, and they charged against the English, who were kind of lightly armored, but they hadn't planned properly for the fact that the field was extremely muddy and wet, and all the mounts were slipping and falling, and when the knights hit the ground, they were so heavy they couldn't even get up off the ground. The English fell upon them and slew them all. So some of the downsides of these chivalrous approaches. But I like this paragraph here. I'll read this. Mother's anthropos, not the perhaps we can only begin to understand how protective legendary knights were of their honor when we realize what happened to dishonored knights. In the legendary English tournament, Thomas of I'm trying to read this on my screen down there, it's a little bit small, of Montalba fought fiercely, although he had been wounded in the growing, and almost managed to defeat Tyrant until he collapsed of blood loss. If I'm wounded in the growing, to the degree I'm losing blood at that level, I'm done. This guy, he kept going. And it said, accepting dishonor rather than death, he surrendered to Tyrant, and he was expelled from his knightly order for this cravenly act. Mm-hmm. In Tyrant's world, the ceremony for expulsion was mercilessly explicit. First, the dishonored knight was placed on a scaffold as a public spectacle. Then his armor was stripped from him piece by piece. He was dishonored by being hurled into the dust. A bowl of hot water was then thrown in his face, and he was given a new name. He lost his name. He's given a new name, and the right to ever use his old one again is gone. The ceremony being completed, the knight was summarily hurled from the scaffolding. And they cite here examples of where this could be so humiliating. One died, his gallbladder burst from the humiliation, and he died kind of in his own bile. So the punitive element that existed for failing your order and your honor was so heavy, and that also drove this behavior. Mm-hmm. Pretty gross.
Yeah, a little bit.
So they have other ones where they talk about desiring tokens from fair maidens as a big part of it. Fun for role play. Yeah, exactly. And they give examples of how that could work, with the other gender. So you could have a female cavalier that would, desire a token of a male that she admires, and that's something that they did build into this article. It was a fairly gender neutral article. Mm-hmm. One of the more controversial ones, or really antithetical to how we think in 2020, is this idea of reverence for one's lord. Mm-hmm. Did you ever watch the show Tudors on Netflix?
I watched a few episodes. I never finished it.
Yeah, it's Henry VIII, right? And it's all about. But one of the things that struck out to me as I watched that was the degree to which it didn't matter what he did. People that he put to death as they laid their heads in the chopping block would praise the honor and glory of his majesty. Yeah, I enjoyed that show. They would praise the honor and glory of his majesty and how good he had been to them and how benevolent he had been to them. They had nothing to gain. Their heads were getting chopped off anyway, but this was so ingrained in that society. And so he cites here the Song of Cid, where Rui Diaz was unrighteously exiled from his homeland by King Alfonso and of Leon and Castile. And basically what he goes on to talk about here is this guy lived the rest of his life in exile, but he continued to praise his Lord. He continued to tithe. He would send him money and offerings. He spoke highly of him wherever he went. And so the Cavalier, your ever-loving servant Chop. Exactly. And so the idea was the Cavalier, he would honor his patron or his lord to such a high level, it would be really difficult for us to conceive of in our current culture. Honor before gold. I think this is an important part of role play with both paladins and cavaliers. They're not going to be greedy, as the scripture would say, of filthy lucre. They're going to, of course, take their just due. They're going to buy armor and horses. Superman and The Witcher were... Oh, yeah, you're exactly right. They were. Henry Cavill, right? Isn't that his name? Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was. He did a great job in that, too. So anyway, this idea that they would be... So if you've got a player that's, wants to be a cavalier, but he's greedy of gold, wants to be a paladin, he's greedy of gold, he's not... To me, in my campaign, that's a quick... route to fallen paladinhood, expulsion from your order. It's a good way to become a fighter, I guess is the way I would put it. It's a good way to just become a fighter. And then the last piece of this article is kind of what was being talked about earlier by our viewers, the role-playing implications. Mm-hmm. So here's an example. If Yeah, I think that's a good point. The soldiers that guard the tomb of the unknown soldier. If you've watched the changing of those guards, it's incredible. The degree of honor, chivalry, just the structure of what they do. It's incredible. So back to this idea of role-playing implications. So I don't know if you can read that on your screen there, Evelyn, but can you read that part about Roderick the Bold?
Oh, let's see. Hold on. Gonna have to make it bigger. Okay. Roderick the Bold is standing watch for the party. That part under the role-playing implication. Yep. Which is camped by night in a pine forest. Sir Roderick suddenly hears the sound of an approaching band of orcs. Will Sir Roderick wake them up to join in the fight, or will he nobly decide that he can handle the situation by himself? They're only orcs.
Exactly. So, that's an example of how that can, I think it was Redbeard, or maybe it was Lurkenstein, or maybe it was, I forget who it was earlier, said, the reckless party member, who gets them in trouble. That's an example of how that could manifest with this character type. If he thinks it's his honor to go out and fight those 4 orcs in the darkness by himself, so that the party can sleep and wake up and he gets the honor and the glory of the battle, boom, he's got it. Or bravely run away. Other examples, would he even be willing to retreat? If a situation truly called for retreat, would he do it? Or if he felt like someone in his party over here, you had unchivalrous conduct, would he challenge him to face him in personal combat? And then lastly, they give some examples of, bad Cavaliers, and you can have evil Cavaliers and some villainous people throughout history. So now the last article on chivalry and Cavaliers is in the same issue, 127. And the Code of Chivalry is the heart and soul of the knight. We've talked about that. Some neat things here. They have rules on the order, and it's a pretty stringent structure for the order of a Cavalier. And I really like it. So they've got here 18 rules, and many of them are things you would expect, certain comportment and ways that you would handle yourself in combat. But you also have a mandatory tithing of 10%. You have knights must adhere to strict codes of chivalry, honor, and in this case they're saying lawful good alignment. So whereas a Cavalier could be of different alignments, to be in this type of order, it would require a lawful good alignment. If they're challenged, they have to accept the challenge or be considered dishonored. Number 13, they have to grant mercy to any opponent that yields or surrenders. Now, I thought about this. I think that would be exclusive to human or perhaps humanoid, demi-human, human or demi-human combatants. I would not see a situation where a goblin that begs for quarter would be required, of the order to spare.
I don't know that many goblins would actually beg for quarter anyway. So
depends on how you role play and what, if you take the Pathfinder goblins, the Galarian, they absolutely would. They're semi-sentient, craven little creatures, which is usually. But if you take some of the more, feral types of goblins in other game worlds, you're probably right. That's what the mercy dagger is for. Exactly. Knights of the order may participate in adventures with other characters, but they cannot participate with characters that are not either good or neutral. So they cannot be evil. You cannot, and I think this is important for any of these, paladins. I think even a character, if you look at our Greyhawk campaign, there should be some tension between, I think several of the party members. You have a paladin of Heronius who desires to be a member of the Order of Ulek, and could not. He could, but it just wouldn't last long. No. Yes, that's exactly right. But you've got a druid in that party, and that druid is going to, true neutral druid. And so the ideologies would be very different. I don't think it's necessarily a huge conflict, but it will cause, tension, and I think it'll be an interesting point. You've got, a couple of not exactly rogues, but roguish types in the party, including one Millie, Millie the Merry. And so it's going to be fun to see how the paladin interacts. And my expectation is that all players will be true to their characters, and it will create some interesting roleplay moments. And then just finishing up on this fun article, back up here. You have these ideas for losing and gaining honor, which I really liked. Let me see if I can't zoom in like that, can I? So let me kill the full screen mode. I just want people to be able to see this a little better. Control L. Okay. There we go. Now you should be able to see that a little bit better. All right, so methods of gaining or losing honor. So the idea here is you start as a DM, you track the player, and they begin really with no honor. And the goal is to raise up on the order or the honor chart here. So let me kind of...
That's cool.
Yeah, it's a really neat structure that they put in this... Really neat structure that they put in this issue. And I'm going to use this in our Greyhawk campaign for our Paladin, because I think it's very applicable. And so what happens then is, they don't get anything until they reach 50 points of honor. When they get to 50, they get a +1 on NPC reaction rolls. Okay. But then they start accelerating a little more quickly. Ivanhoe, very long, difficult to read, but it's all about chivalry and honor. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yes. Exactly. The knight gains a minor magical item from his order when he gets to 65 honor points. He gains the ability to detect evil like a paladin when he hits 80 honor points. He gets a major magical item from his order when he hits 90 honor points, and he's given a fief, land, or holdings, and all required hirelings by the order once he gets over 100 honor points.
That's pretty awesome.
It's a really cool system. It's pretty simple, and it gives this type of Paladin Cavalier player a measurement system that goes beyond just experience points and level and hit points and how much gold do I have, but how are they building their honor and then the attendant benefits that come with it, which make a lot of sense. And so here's how they get honor. Now I will modify this in my game because I think some of these are a little improperly balanced, but as an example, if you destroy a major foe of your order, automatically 10 honor points. I like that. A great quest, 5, or I've got this one highlighted, fulfilling a major oath. You get 5 honor points if you fulfill a major oath. So Pat said back in the he used it back in the age. He allowed the class to start with their level times 10 plus a random D10. So you were then, it sounds like you were starting characters at something other than level 1, if I'm hearing that right. I have never really done that. Every campaign I've ever run, they start at level 1. So they would have, if you ran it your system, they'd get 10 points plus a random D10. Yeah, I think that's not a bad idea. And in fact, if you take the idea that, for example, Wilnon, I think is his name, Steve's Paladin, obviously he's done some things up to this point. He may have a little bit of honor that's been accrued. If you survive Castle Anthrax, 100 points. So a couple things I thought were interesting. Defeating evil monsters, you get +1 point for every 2,000 of XP values, the more difficult the monster. But a contingency, you see that asterisk there, is that you have to defeat him in one-on-one combat. Right. So if the party slays the dragon, you're not getting the honor from that. I think I might modify that in some way. I still think there's honor to be gained depending on the role that you have in the combat. But I like this idea that to get the full benefit, it's really sort of single one-on-one combat. They started at level 1, but it was 10. Yeah, backstory. Yeah, that makes sense. And then one I think is really unbalanced, for example, is saving another's life while risking your own. Now, I think you have to really measure what this is. Just running to the front of the party in a fight, to me, is not, saving another's life to risk your own. But if you had a role play situation where, I can't think of exactly what that would be like, but where hey, Shane O'Mac, way to pop in right before we're done. We're about to raid Jay here in a second, but man, it's always good to see you, and I know you're working crazy hours now too, so we appreciate any Shane time that we get. So anyway, this idea that if a paladin or if a cavalier or paladin were to somehow throw themselves truly into mortal danger, where this situation could be the end of their character, and they do so to save another character in the party, I'm going to give them a lot more than 1 honor point. I think that's the kind of thing. So I'm going to employ this in the Greyhawk campaign. I'm going to print this out and kind of keep it with me. I think it's going to be a really fun element to add to the party. Oh, okay. Well, I hope they're not bad IRL matters, Pat. I mean, man, I'm not going to have time to get to the ability scores like I wanted to today. Yeah, good. I'm glad. I'm not to get to the ability scores like I wanted to today because we're about out of time, and I do want to raid Jay here with a couple minutes to go. But I think, one, do you have any final closing thoughts on any of this, Evelyn, or anything you'd like to say? I know I rambled on a bit tonight, but it's part of the nature of having all these articles prepped.
I think I like the using these honor things for Cavaliers and for Paladins. I think that's a great idea to like incentivize them to do and follow the rules that makes them who they are.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. And so I think it's been a fun discussion. I know Steve was actually going to try to check this out and watch it, so hopefully he got to tune in. If not, I'll have him watch the rerun. But this really does apply, of course, a lot to his character.
Right.
But I'm pulling elements of this from everything. I'm pulling elements from the swashbuckler for your character. The gnome illusionist in our party. It's a lot of 1E, 2E influences. I just felt there was more customization and more flavor to the characters and to the character classes than what you get in some of the newer editions, and I understand why. It's to simplify it, it's to make it more accessible, but inevitably you sacrifice something, and so I really like what you get from these more sort of nuanced and interesting classes.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So as we close, syndication. Actually, with that, so our show schedule will be posted up on Instagram and also on our Twitch channel. But we're going to be our normal 1:30 Central Time every Sunday, Rune Lords. Loremasters Academy, like this one, every Wednesday night at this time. And then the new campaign, Greyhawk Awakening, will be starting on Tuesday the 9th. That's next Tuesday, or this coming Tuesday. That's at 5 p.m. Central, and all those will be on that. And so we just really appreciate all of our viewers. You guys are so great. The chats are always fantastic. It's really why I like doing this. To me, the engagement that I have with the viewers is what makes all of this fun. On this Mystara, I don't see Mystara coming anytime soon. Redbeard, I've got too much on my plate already to resurrect. We got another OGer that's running Dragonlance. There's lots of good stuff out there, but man, this Greyhawk stuff is fun. So as I close, I wanted to say to everybody that look, we're all going through some really trying times right now. The world that we're living in right now, the things that we're dealing with, the pandemic, the social strife that we have, the injustice and the horrible things happening all around us. It's been a challenging time just dealing with quarantine. I know so many people that are struggling with depression, some that are struggling with substance abuses, and I don't get into a lot of political stuff. I just don't think that's the place for me on social media and whatnot. I don't really feel like you change people's minds on social media, but I do think it's a time for all of us to have empathy with one another. And I really appreciate everyone that joins us for these chats. And to me, probably more than ever, role-playing is a fun escape. These games are things which for me as a child, maybe when things were tough, when I had problems at home, they really served as a way to engage creativity and to escape sometimes from the parts of real life that were not always very much fun. And I think that is just one of the many aspects that make Dungeons and Dragons and role play so amazing. And I just hope all of you are having a good week. Be good to each other, and hopefully you can join us on Saturday night. All right. Thanks everybody. Hang out for. Thank you very much, Lurkenstein.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, as I'm getting ready to raid, just one note on that. I think I mentioned this before. When I was in high school, the role playing group, or the sort of the D&D club, was called the Escapist Society. And that's kind of what it was all about. So if you haven't checked out Jay is Lord Gasumba. He is kind of our patron here on all things Greyhawk. He's the channel I'm going to be on all of our cast of this campaign will be on Saturday night. So give him a quick check out, and everybody have a great night. Blue Box is going to be signing out here in 10, 9, 8. If you didn't follow and you like what you saw tonight, what are you doing? Thanks, everybody. Blue Box out.
Oh my goodness, child.
She gave you a fun time tonight, huh?
Yeah.
All right, let me close this guy. Yeah, I don't